Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is rapidly becoming one of the best-known names in board game art and graphic design, starting as a graphic and spatial designer in a wide range of areas, including exhibitions and museums. A chance upload to BGG led him into the world of graphic design and art in games. Since then, he's worked on A Study in Emerald with Martin Wallace, the wildly successful Nemo's War, and has struck up a relationship with Vital Lacerda that is stretched over multiple titles. My guest this week is Ian O'Toole. Ian, welcome to the show.
Hi Ben, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So, to begin, how difficult was it? Now, I have a window on this because you sent me an email using block capitals and exclamation marks, but how difficult was it to choose the games?
A 10 would have been fine. 5 is so difficult. I have different attachments to so many games for so many different reasons. You know, games that I've worked on, games that I just enjoy playing, games I enjoy playing with certain people. Games that mean various other things to me, and there's just so much. There's just so much variety to choose from. So it was very difficult.
And what was your criteria? Are these games nostalgic, practical, sentimental? Do you have an attachment to them?
A variety of all of that. In the end, what I ended up imagining is if this was happening right now, what are the 5 games that I want right now for various reasons? So I left off some of my favorite. These aren't my favorite games. Some of them are, but I've left off some of my favorite games. So some of these are quite specific to this moment in my life for various reasons, which we'll get into. But yeah, if it was happening right now, what 5 games would I pick off the shelf? And that's what you've got.
So, if this situation were to happen, you know, we all had to flee the city from the aliens that are attacking, what function do you think gaming would serve in the cabin? I guess is a broader way of asking, what function do you see gaming serving in general?
Well, entertainment, first and foremost, and distraction, probably, in an end-of-the-world situation. They would be the main things. I mean, you know, games can be all sorts of things to different people, educational and all that sort of stuff. But for me, it would be entertainment, primarily.
So you've got children. Are they getting into games? Do you want them to get into games, or are they too young for that?
No, they are very much so getting into games. And some of my choices are coloured by that and by them. So, yeah, they're very, very much becoming little gamers under my under my tutelage.
And what do you see gaming giving them?
It's been really good in so they're 7 and 9 now. When they were younger, it was really good in teaching just the idea of being a good sport, a good winner, a good loser. All of that was very, very useful. They don't have any issues with that, whereas every now and then you see other kids who do. Who get upset when they lose or, aren't gracious winners. I think it's also being beneficial, with just basic problem solving, logic, maths, attention even, things like that.
And do you think it'll benefit them educationally going on in the future?
I think it certainly has the potential to. I mean, whether or not, I guess, how the extent to which it will or won't will depend on how much their interest continues as they grow up. I don't really push gaming on them very much. If they're interested in it, then obviously I'll indulge them, but it's not something that I'm forcing on them. But I think it has the potential to because gaming is so varied, it has the potential to be whatever you can get out of it, whatever you want to get out of it, really.
So let's go back to the beginning. I want to talk about art. What drew you into art to begin with? What drew you into drawing?
Primarily comic books. I think, I assume, I've always read comic books and I've always drawn, and I think, I can't really remember is the honest answer, but I think the most likely thing is comic books. We had an uncle of mine who worked at a printer's, and I distinctly remember this, I've no idea what age I was, delivered basically a huge refuse sack full of comic books, mostly 2000 AD titles at the time, and an old English comic called Star Blazer, which was a sort of science fiction anthology thing, and they all had the covers torn off because they were all rejects from news agents and things like that. But he just dumped this on us one day, and that was like a good year's reading material.
So you grew up in Bray, which is on the Irish coast. Now, what is Bray like? Is it a kind of place that we imagine Irish towns to be? Live musicians in every pub, ceilidhs on every street corner, that sort of thing.
It is. I mean, to an extent, it probably isn't exactly what you're imagining. Bray was a town that kind of hit its heyday in the 20s and 30s. It was a kind of day tripping destination from Dublin because it's fairly close but far enough away to feel like you're going somewhere. And it kind of still holds on to that, at least aesthetic. We still have a sort of promenade along the seafront, and these old fashioned 1920s style. There's a bandstand and all that type of thing. It's a pretty quiet town. It's there's honestly not a huge amount to say about it other than that.
So you got these comics, and I assume you're sneaking down to the beach and going into caves and reading them to the sound of the sea. And were you one of those kids who always doodled? Do you think that art was an innate skill that you had?
No, absolutely not. Yes, so to your first question, yes, I was always one of those kids who loved to doodle and draw, forever defacing, my textbooks in school. Innate skill, I would say no. I don't feel like it is. I feel like I just did it enough to get good at it. I still feel like that's the case now. But yeah, I was always drawing. My parents used to get old cast off rolls of wallpaper, and used to put it in our shed at the bottom of our garden, and we just roll that out into long strips and draw all over it. Myself and my brother and my sister, who were as kids much better at drawing than I was, but they just didn't keep it up. So yeah, I've always drawn forever throughout my life, but I've always met people who seem to have an easier time drawing as well. So I've always had to work pretty hard on it.
And what were some of the artists that inspired you to go on and draw, and inspired your style?
Oh God, so many. So I don't know about my style, and I still, even to this day, I don't know that I have a style, honestly. That's, I guess, for other people to say. I'm not certain that I do. Initially, as a kid, it was, again, comic book artists. So I mentioned 2000 AD was a big influence. So people like Simon Bisley and Mike McMahon and Ian Gibson, Kevin O'Neill were all big influences. Joel Colquhoun, who did Charlie's War, which was a huge deal for me. And as I got older, moving into sort of fantasy and science fiction artists like Les Edwards, who did a lot of work for Games Workshop in the day. Running out of names. Alan Lee and John Howe, who's, the Lord of the Rings, they're famous for doing those. Yeah, there's so many. But they would be the main ones from sort of comic book era.
And if there was an artist you could recommend, that listeners can go away and type into Google, who do you think it would be?
Probably Bernie Fuchs. which is Bernie Fuchs. He's a old editorial illustrator, primarily editorial and advertising illustrator. He's a marvelous painter, just an incredible draftsman as well.
So when did gaming come into your life, and how available were games in a rural Irish seaside town?
Pretty available. We had that one family on the road whose parents bought them all the toys, and they had an attic which was full of board games, most of which we didn't play, I'm sorry to say, but some of which we did. So Escape from Colditz and Axis and Allies and things like that. I'm sure we played them all wrong, but that's also where we started to play D&D, which became a big thing in my childhood. We played D&D a lot. We also played like the Middle-earth role-playing game and a lot of role-playing games, sort of growing up until leaving sort of secondary school or high school and going to college.
And what sort of inspiration were those kind of games, D&D, Middle-earth role-playing game on your job being an artist?
That's difficult to say. I think they kind of instilled in me a love for fantasy and for science fiction and, fantastical fiction in general. So that's always carried through, and that's always been present in my life. I don't know, beyond that, I'm not sure if role-playing has had a huge influence on what I do now directly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
So your first game is an archetype of fantasy, and this is War of the Ring. Why are you taking this one with you?
So this is the main one, which my kids have played a big part in the decision making here. So I am right in the middle of reading Lord of the Rings to my two girls. We're past the halfway point at this stage.
What's just happened?
Faramir has just turned up. He's just come into it. Yeah, it's all very exciting. And I love it. I love reading it to them. I started reading The Hobbit to them on a whim, and they really, really loved it. And then I thought, well, they're probably a bit young for Lord of the Rings, but we'll give it a go. And they are so into it. They love it. And it's the first time that I'm rereading it since it's my first complete read through since I was a kid. Although I know, the stories and characters very, very well. So that's just been a really fantastic experience. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking once we're done, first of all, we're going to watch the movies once we're done. But after that, and again, probably when they're a little bit older, I just can't wait to play War of the Ring with them. It's going to be fantastic. And besides that, I love the game. It's a fantastic game.
And how much do you think it evokes Lord of the Rings?
A lot. It is. I'm not usually drawn to games that are based on an IP. Typically, I'm not, or games that attempt to recreate an IP. But War of the Ring, I think, treads that very, very fine line between every outcome in the game feels appropriate, but it does also it has the potential to tell a very different version of the same story.
And to love a game, do you think you have to be immersed in its theme? Or can you love something that is mechanically rigid but thematically cold?
I can personally, yeah, very easily. This is I'm trying to look at the rest of my games. This is probably the biggest theme focused game. For me, thematic immersion isn't needed at all for me to enjoy a game. I enjoy abstracts, and I think part of that, from my point of view, is being involved in the creation of artwork of games. I'm often responsible for bringing the theme out and representing it in a game, and part of that, I guess, gives me an insight to what a thin veneer that can be in a game, and how easily it could be removed or changed into something else. And, we hear things about slapped-on themes often. But, from my perspective, there are very few games that actually have a very well-integrated theme. Most games you could retheme pretty easily, I think.
And do you have an attitude towards the games you've illustrated? Because you see them as prototypes, as naked, if you want. So, you have a less of a thematic connection to them. You just see them as a lot of mechanics that are put together.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's true that sort of during my process, I strip away all the theme, everything, and just, make the game out of boxes and circles, and, just so that the layout and ergonomics of the game will work. That's, at one point in the process, that's a primary focus. So artwork and illustration and theme is all stripped away at that point. So I do definitely interact with the game at its most bare. But I don't think so. I kind of enjoy the process of layering things over that and trying to think, is there a way that we can frame either this mechanic or this section of the board or whatever. Is there a thematic way that we can frame it that will either evoke something that we're trying to evoke or make the game easier to learn, or all these different things that artwork can do. So although I do see the games at their very bare bones, I don't really think it affects either my enjoyment or my immersion once the game is complete, having gone through that process.
So how does someone who starts sitting in the back bedroom doodling on rolls of wallpaper become a graphic artist? How did you enter that world?
I studied, and I use the term very loosely, what was it? It was visual communication is what I was taught, which is basically graphic design. I did a 1-year, what was called a portfolio course, which means you're out of school, you don't quite know what you want to do, but it's something arty. And then you just spend the year making prints and painting and drawing and doing all sorts of fun things. And then at the end of it, hopefully you've got a portfolio and a better idea of what you want to do. I think at that point, if somebody asked me what my dream job was, it probably still would have been a comic artist. But I was also starting to realize that I'm, in fact, not good enough as a draftsperson to do that job effectively.
And what does that mean? What do you lack? And if you could, can you explain it for lay people?
What did I lack? I don't know. I mean, at that point, it was just the ability to produce the sort of images that were inspiring me to want to do that type of work. Now, that's probably setting my sights way too high. And I'm sure if I had just given it a go, well, I'm not sure, but probably if I had just given it a go and, started along that road, then I would improve as everybody does with practice. But it seemed so far away from where I was that I just didn't really see a path to get there at the time. So I decided to study visual communication, again, which is graphic design. The main factor in that decision was that it was an employable skill, honestly. I thought about fine art, but that's not really my thing. Fine art is, painting, sculpting, art with a capital A. I thought about animation, but again, I felt my drawing skills weren't quite there. And graphic design seemed like I could do it.
So then you entered the world of graphic design professionally, and then you decided to move to Australia. And you said in your notes that partly it was the Celtic tiger that prompted this. So why did you go to Australia? And what was the Celtic tiger element that prompted it?
So we moved to Australia kind of just before everything, really went down the toilet. And it seems like some sort of canny foresight, but it was more dumb luck, honestly.
Were you living in Dublin at this time?
Yes, yeah. So I had met my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We were living together, and we were kind of reaching that stage of our lives where we were like, are we going to have kids? Are we going to buy a house? You know, what's the next thing? What are we going to do? What are we going to waste our money on? And at the time, it was at the peak, right? So, you know, housing was extremely expensive and crap generally, you know, because sort of fly-by-night builders were coming and building houses out of cardboard. And
I heard stories around about this time because the government in Ireland had great initiatives for buy to rent, and I heard stories of like taxi drivers having huge property portfolios. Is this true?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, nothing would surprise me. You know, banks were granting 100% mortgages, and people were just going crazy. Building houses as far as the eye can see. We had friends that would buy a house probably an hour's commute outside of Dublin, even though they worked in Dublin. And you know, the new estate that they had bought into, they hadn't built any schools or shops or post offices. You know, they literally just built houses because that's what people wanted. There was no foresight or planning being put into any of these things. And also, that sort of environment attracts opportunists. So there were a huge amount of buildings put up that, for instance, didn't follow fire codes. Things like that. You know, after it all went to shit, a lot of people, first of all, found themselves in huge amounts of negative equity and houses that they had no chance of selling. But also, at times, some people would find that they actually weren't allowed to live in the house that they owed so much on because that house didn't come to safety standards. So there was a lot of that sort of stuff going on. And we basically, our decision to move to Australia, we kind of looked at what we could afford. And we thought, well, that doesn't really seem like what we want to do. And we were still pretty young. We didn't have kids at that time. So we figured, well, just why don't we travel for a little while and basically delay the decision. So we did. Sarah has family in Australia, which is why Australia, became our destination. I had never been to Australia when we emigrated. So it seemed like a bit of a whim at the time, honestly. It didn't seem like a big, this is forever, life-changing decision informed by many factors. It was just kind of we'll give it a go. If it doesn't work out, we'll come back,
And what was it about Australia, because you've been there a long time now, what was it about Australia that compelled you to stay?
The weather's nice. So we're in Perth, and the weather is really nice here. It's also it's a lovely place to have kids. We've had our two girls since living here. It's a great place for kids. And we've always found work pretty easily. So for the first few years, again, while Ireland's economy was in the dumps, if we had gone back, I don't think I would have found it very, very hard to find work, because in that sort of environment, things like advertising is the first thing that people cut, right? Any sort of extra expenses like that, advertising, design, all that stuff just gets cut. So creative people have a pretty hard time in that sort of economic environment. So I felt, I found work very easily over here. And so did Sarah. And we've never really had a compelling reason. I mean, family aside, we've never really had a compelling reason to go back.
So there's a huge Irish diaspora. Everywhere you go, there's always loads of Irish people. And of course, there are loads of Irish people here in Berlin. What is it about that? Do you think there's something innate in the Irish character that makes you want to leave your little island and explore the world?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's a great history of people leaving Ireland for various reasons. But I don't know if I'd say it's innate. And I don't know what the Irish character is. It's very hard for me to say that as an Irish person. It's very hard to define what a the character of a nation is when you're part of that nation, because you see the subtleties and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know is my answer to that, my disappointing answer.
So your next game is a classic, and this one is Castles of Burgundy. First of all, do you think this is Stefan Feld's best game?
It's my favourite, so yeah, I guess. It's by far my favourite, yeah.
So what is it about this game? You know, a lot of people, they always talk about this being Stefan Feld's best game, and they think of it with incredible warmth. You know, what is it about it, do you think?
It's very accessible. It's very easy, but it does that thing that games do sometimes where they make you feel clever. And it does it often. It gives you, it's the point salad thing. It gives you lots of little rewards throughout the game, which, you're making progress. That feels good. It's just an enjoyable game. It's got lots of options, but the dice are very clever because they limit those options. But then if, every now and then you have that big move where you feel like you're kind of, you're tricking the game almost. You're breaking free of these restraints to do more things and chain these tile effects together and all that. Yeah, that's it. It's the chaining of abilities is basically what you play Castles of Burgundy for.
And when did you first come across this game?
Right after it came out, I'm pretty sure, and I couldn't tell you when that was off the top of my head, but it was pretty new when I played it first.
And this was in Australia?
Yes, yeah. So my sort of modern board gaming, or whatever title you want to put on it, career started in Australia.
And what's the gaming scene like in Australia? I mean, are the games available, or are they really difficult to get?
They are very available. The gaming scene is really good, particularly in Perth. We have a really healthy gaming scene. But yes, they are very expensive. Shipping is just ridiculous. If just go to any Kickstarter and have a look at the shipping to Australia, it's usually under the rest of the world, and it gets pretty stupid at times.
And does this limit the games that you buy?
Sure, to an extent. I mean, obviously, things are more expensive, and we've all got budgets. I guess I'm just used to it, honestly. It's kind of what it comes down to.
And what do you think defines Stefan Feld as a game designer? And what would you say to those people who say that his games are just point salads and they're unremittingly dry and dull?
What would I say to those people? Nothing really. I'd advise them to play a game that they enjoy. I said earlier that theme really, I enjoy theme when it works. Like, I do appreciate it and I do enjoy it, but I don't need it. A lot of gamers seem to, and if you're that type of gamer, then Feld's games likely aren't for you. I think Castles of Burgundy is maybe the one that seems to cut through, and it's not on strength of its theme. I think it's just it's such a good game that it's his one game that tends to cut through a little bit. But what defines a Feld game? Well, it's point salad. They're very mechanical. It's just mechanisms over theme. Basically, would define his games pretty well, I think.
And broadly speaking, are you the kind of gamer that prefers that?
I will play a good game with a terrible theme quicker than I will play a terrible game with a good theme, if that makes sense. I can. If the game is terrible, I'm not going to play it. Or if that's where I will judge a game first and foremost. But where I will notice a game first and foremost is with its theme and aesthetics.
So moving on, how did you get embroiled in the world of board game art as a profession?
When I started working for myself.
So you said in your email that you partly quit your job because you had a terrible boss. What was terrible about your boss?
Oh my God. I have very little tolerance for things like office politics and stuff like that. And the environment that he created was full of that. It was full of stress and and politics, and I have no time for that whatsoever. So I just didn't. I mean, I stayed there for 5 years, but I was always at odds with the environment, and I don't really. I'm a little bit of a path of least resistance type of person. So looking back, I'm surprised I stayed there that long, but I did.
So you left, and then you just posted some stuff to BGG.
Yeah, pretty much. Again, on a bit of a whim, because I thought it would be fun, and I figured I could do it. And then I ended up getting some projects. The first full game that I did was called Fool's Gold by Joshua Balvin, which I think is still available, but through Passport Studios. And it was really fun. I hadn't really considered it before, but it's the perfect fit for my skill set. It's illustration and graphic design together. Each one kind of has more or less the same importance, more or less. And it was really fun because it allowed me to create a full product. I did everything, and that's pretty rare.
Yeah, I assume in most games you have an artist and a graphic designer, and they do their own thing. They're kind of mutually exclusive.
Typically, yeah, you'd have a graphic designer and an illustrator. Yeah.
Then after you did that, did you think, well, this is something I could be good at?
Yeah, I did. I kind of looked into a couple of what ended up being fairly high profile jobs for me, which was the Gallerist and A Study in Emerald, and Nemo's War to an extent as well. These jobs came along in a very haphazard type of way, mostly just me emailing people and asking them, and them saying yes, surprisingly. Yeah, I it's very hard for me to sort of say, what were the things that kind of turned it from a couple of jobs into what is basically a career now. But I mean, part of it was I just, as I said, I really enjoyed it. It really fit with what I do, and I just found I also have always found it relatively easy to find work, which is again unusual.
So what are the unique challenges in gaming? Because you've worked in gaming and you've worked in non-gaming, and what is it about gaming that offers a unique challenge?
The biggest is probably specificity. So, the and this is a graphic design thing more than an illustration thing. The things that you indicate in a game, either through iconography or through text or whatever, through arrows and lines and areas and whatever it is, have to be very, very specific and as clear as possible in their purpose. Any room for misunderstanding, if there is any room for misunderstanding, it will be misunderstood without fail. So that's quite unique. It's not often that, if I was doing a poster for a concert, for instance, I wouldn't have to write every single detail with inscrutable accuracy for people to get what it meant, to get the message and for the poster to do its job. But with a board game, you need to be that specific, because it is representing rules and what you can and can't do. A poster doesn't need to say it's on Friday. It's on Friday only. It just says it's on Friday. It doesn't need to say it's on every Friday. You know what I mean? All of these different interpretations that you could have of it's on Friday. You need to be very, very specific with board games. So that's probably the biggest challenge.
Now, I've never quite understood this, and this is a product of my own ignorance, of course, but, what is the difference between art and graphic design? And when does art become graphic design and vice versa?
Okay, so I'm going to avoid the word art as much as possible, because that's a whole other conversation. I'm going to say illustration. So illustration is I guess what some might call commercial art, It's images that illustrate a published piece of work, right? A book, whatever it is, or a game. Graphic design is visual communication. So graphic design has a specific message to portray and uses things like typography, color, composition, sometimes illustration or photography is, bringing that in as part of graphic design. And they will use those tools to communicate whatever needs to be communicated. So that's what graphic design is primarily. It's a communicative endeavor.
And logos? Where do they fall?
Typically under graphic design. Under graphic design, 99.9% of the time. Because a logo should, again, be communicative. A logo should communicate something about the game or about the product, whatever it is.
So you've been doing this for a while now. Is there any projects you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, sure. I'm very proud of all the games that I've done with Vital Lacerda. I'm very proud of Nemo's War. Is one that I really enjoyed doing. I'm to a greater or lesser degree. To be honest, I'm proud of all of them because it's work I really enjoy. So I do try and do my best as much as possible.
So your next one is a war game, and this is Paths to Glory. Why did you choose this one?
Paths of Glory. Paths of Glory is a huge war game. It's a strategic level World War I game. I am taking this because I would like to have in this scenario a game, at least one game that I have yet to discover. So Paths of Glory is a game that I've played twice, and I've never actually finished a game because a game typically takes about 12 hours. So I've played it twice for 8 hours each time, and I've had a fantastic time playing it. I really, really enjoy it. But I kind of think of it as one of my retirement games. When I retire and I've got nothing to do and I'm at leisure, I'll sit and play all these old, long war games with, some other old codger who wants to do it. So that's kind of why it's on the list. I wanted to bring a game that that I know I like and I want to explore a lot more, but I just haven't done it yet. And Paths of Glory is top of that list.
And why do you play war games? There are lots of gamers, myself included, and maybe this is a, intimidation of the rules thing that's shy away from war games. What do war games give you?
Well, I don't play a huge amount of war games. I've played some, but I just haven't had the time to invest in playing that many. I guess they give you an impression of what could have happened, if that makes sense. A history book will tell you what happened, and they'll sometimes explain what some of the viable alternatives were, but they definitely won't explain what the what the stupid alternatives were. And war games allow you to experience that. They allow you, it gives a very real and present sense of the decision space. And I don't look at them as simulation. They are educational to an extent, but if I really want to learn about history, I'll read a history book. I don't really see war games in that light from my perspective. But I just think it's that sort of 360-degree view of an event or a series of events in history, and that sort of what if. It's almost the War of the Ring thing, right? It's like it's close enough to the real conflict, but what if all of the commanders were idiots who didn't know what to do, and it would be a bigger disaster maybe than it had been. That's what I get from war games.
And this is a World War I game, and this period of history was huge in the formation of Ireland as a nation. Is that partly the reason you're drawn to it?
I don't know if it's particularly anything to do with Ireland's relationship to World War One, which is very, very complicated. But World War One in general is a huge area of interest for me. It's just a fascinating time of just universal upheaval. So I mean, I'd never really thought about it in that respect of being Irish. I guess it and particularly when looking at World War One games and things like that, knowing that period from an Irish perspective, I guess teaches me a couple of things. One is that all of these periods are far more complicated than any game could ever possibly hope to portray. Whatever about the sides that each country was on, the subtleties of that and of the populances and all that is vastly more complicated. So it would teach me that perspective is everything, and just because we know the broad strokes of a conflict or period in history, there's a lot more just beneath that surface.
So going on then, I want to ask some questions about, in general about being an artist in the board game industry. So firstly, what makes a good board game artist as opposed to any other kind?
I think, so if you are an illustrator, if you're just producing pictures, that sounds condescending, but if you're an illustrator, I don't think anything in particular makes you a better board game illustrator. I think at the moment, to be honest, if what you produce is unique, I think that's a big bonus. As a graphic designer, I think you need to be a gamer on some level. I think it would be really difficult to be a board game graphic designer and not understand fundamentally how board games work. It would be bewildering. To work on the board for Lisboa and not understand how the game plays, it would be impossible, I think. So that first and foremost, that's the main thing. You need to understand the games, and you need to, and that would be torture, I think, if you weren't actually a gamer. I think that would be the worst thing in the world.
So how stable is board game illustration and graphic design as a profession?
I don't know. I haven't been doing it for that long. It's been stable for me in that I have had more work than I can do. I've had to turn down work.
And do you talk to other illustrators, graphic designers in the industry?
Yeah, quite a lot. A lot of us are sort of in contact with each other. And there's definitely, there's a few who either exclusively or primarily produce art for board games. There's quite a few now. But as regards, it's maybe a little early, honestly, to say how stable it is, because the industry as it exists now it's very, very young. So all I can say is right now there's lots of work, but a few years down the line we'll wait and see, I guess.
So what advice would you give someone who wishes to enter your profession?
I would advise, first and foremost, go to conventions and meet people. That is by far, the biggest piece of advice I would give. Even if it's expensive and you have to travel, it's worth it. Other than that, oh God, I don't know. I can't think of anything particular. It's just people. It's a small industry. Be nice to people, help people out when you can. Don't work for free. That's probably a good piece of advice.
And it seems to me the world of art and graphic design, and I can vouch for this as well, being an actor, seems to be beset with people asking to work for exposure. Would you have a hard rule saying, no, don't do that?
Yes, I would. Yeah. And that's not to say that, there's absolutely no possibility if you illustrate, the cover for the next bloody Star Wars movie, that you won't get any more work out of it. But that's not to say that that's impossible, but I would advise just don't do it, because anyone who's not willing to pay you is not going to be fun to work for or to work with, because they obviously just don't.
And, it's the thing that if the project was big enough to be able to give you the kind of exposure that they're promising, then they'd already have the money to pay you anyway. So there seems no reason to do it, in my eyes. So your next game is probably the ultimate hipster game. And this is a game I've not had a chance to play because you just can't get hold of it. And this is Glory to Rome. Explain this to me. Why, people who are in the know, why are they so positive about this game?
For the simple fact that it is the best game ever designed on the face of the earth.
Better than Through the Ages?
It is the best game. I actually haven't played Through the Ages, but it is the best game. Glory to Rome is my number one favourite game. I love Glory to Rome. This
is so common. So many people cite this as their number one favourite game. What is it about this game?
I don't know. I mean, if you're asking why do so many people like it, I have no idea. Because it has a lot of things that I could see would frustrate a lot of people. Such as, wildly powerful abilities and all that sort of stuff. All I can say is, for me, it just fits my brain really well. It's just one of those games that makes sense to me. And I love it. I play it with my wife a lot. We've played it a lot. And it's still, I still find things in it. It's still really enjoyable to play every time. It's really flexible. It's just fantastic. It's really great, and I love the multi-use card system. That's Carl Chudik's thing, really. That's just something I really enjoy whenever it comes up, and I think Glory to Rome. In fact, I believe Glory to Rome is by far the best instance of that.
So when people talk about Glory to Rome, they're almost inevitably talking about the Black Box Edition. And the Black Box Edition gets a lot of press for being beautiful and the best edition of the game. What is it about the graphic design of this edition of the game that does it right?
I think it's what I would call appropriate design, and I'll explain what that means. I think, in the hands of other people, and in the hands of other people, this has been the case, because there are, lots of, obviously there's the old version of Glory to Rome, which is hideous to behold, but there's also, a lot of people will tell you, the French version's the best looking version, or the Belgian version's the best looking version, which I disagree with. I think what those people are responding to is the fact that they're illustrated more lavishly. And Glory to Rome is a game, at least for me, where that would be detrimental to the game, because clarity is important, and also, it's just that, right? Clarity of what the card, when each card can do five different things. The last thing, at least that I want, is for it to have a fancy illustration as well, because that's just more information I don't need. When you look at the pool of cards in the middle of the table, with the Black Box Edition, it's very, very easy to tell what's in there at a glance, whereas with any other edition I've seen, it's not. So I think that it's, the graphic design in the game really comes from a place of what does this game need, to enhance its gameplay.
So, your future. What projects do you have coming up, and what can we expect to see from you and for the rest of this year and going on?
A whole load of stuff. So Escape Plan is Vital Lacerda's next game. That's just finishing up on Kickstarter now. And then I'm straight on to On Mars, which is his next game, because he just won't give me a break. I'm finishing up Black Angel for Pearl Games, which is the follow-up to Trois. I shouldn't say follow-up. It's a game in space, but it shares elements with Trois. I'm also just finishing up Pipeline for Capstone Games, which is their first sort of original game that they're releasing, which is a lovely economic, sort of puzzly economic game. I have some other stuff which will probably be announced quite soon, but hasn't been yet, so I can't talk about that. I've a game called Counterfeiters for Quinid Games has just been announced. That's like a short worker placement game where you're all animals trying to counterfeit money as you do. What else? What else? That's about. Oh, there's other stuff, I'm sure, but I think that's about it that I can talk about right now.
And is there a dream project you'd like to work on? You know, if you could do anything, what would that be?
I really, really wanted to redesign Castles of Burgundy, but they won't let me.
Have you spoken to them about this?
They said thanks, but we're doing our own thing. Yeah, I would love to do that. Other than that, that's really the big one. Every time I play that game, and it's not, you know, a lot of people bag Castles of Burgundy because they think it looks bland, ugly, or whatever. I actually think it does a lot right. It's easy to teach. You know, the iconography works. It's pretty clear. It works pretty well. It doesn't get in the way of playing the game. So I think the current edition actually does, you know, as much as people don't seem, a lot of people don't seem to like it. It does a lot right. But I just think there's a more interesting way to present it all. So yeah, that's the main one for me. I would love to do that.
So your last game is one that you worked on, and this is Lisboa. Now, the colour palette in Lisboa is particularly striking. Why did you go with this?
It was based on research. So the azulejo tiles from Portugal are very synonymous with Portugal and Lisbon and I mean, not just that period, they're still all over the city. But I mean, that was one of the first directions that we went down as regards, you know, just research, and I just kept coming back to it because they look amazing.
And so what's it like illustrating a Vital Lacerda game? And does it offer a different challenge than illustrating other games?
Yeah, very much so. They're the heaviest games and the most complicated games that I illustrate. And one of my favourite parts of the process of any game is when I play the game, and then I just start moving parts around and, you know, asking broad questions. So, you know, should this be here? Should it be there? Should we remove all this and make it a separate board? Do we need tokens? Can it be a track? All these, you know, big sort of ergonomic and structural questions. I really, it's kind of like a stage of visual development in the game, almost like a game developer would develop the game. It's like an additional step.
And when are you doing this? Is this when the design is locked down pretty much, or do you accompany the whole process?
It depends. Typically, I mean, I do this with every game, but typically it's when the design is finished, because that's, again, typically when I get the game. With Vital, it's a little different. So I'll usually play earlier versions of the game, and I will be developing it as the game is being developed, from a gameplay standpoint. But that's just because we work quite closely together, so that's just how that works. But Vital's games, I really have to do that a lot because the games are so complex, and I think the games really benefit from an extended visual development process cycle. So yeah, I really enjoy that, and that's where I see the greatest impact of the work that I do on his games. Even though all the layers of illustration and theme are put on top of all that, it's those core decisions, I think, that really have the biggest impact on the final product.
And what is it about your relationship with Vital? Why has it lasted so long? Why do you think it works so well?
Well, from my perspective, I really like working on his games because they're really interesting puzzles for me for the reasons I've just said. I also really love his games. I mean, Lisboa is on this list. It wouldn't be on this list if I didn't really love the game, and I do. I think from his perspective, I mean, I can't really speak for him, but from his perspective, I think he's very happy to have somebody who understands his games, who takes the time to, make a prototype and play it and sort of, roll up my sleeves and get into it properly. I think he appreciates that. I think, I mean, there's also, I tend to jump around in styles a lot, and I think that kind of suits his games because he does, for very heavy Euros, they're very thematically based. And I think that, for if an illustrator, that sticks to one or maybe two styles typically, it would be difficult to really get into. Lisboa wouldn't have happened if that was the case. It wouldn't look like it does, or the Gallerist might not, or whatever, because they'd all kind of look kind of similar, I guess, or Escape Plan. So I think that kind of helps, that I can jump around. I can approach each project, and we can kind of start with discussions about style. What do we want this game to look like? It's not just go and do your thing. It's, do we want it to look retro? Do we want it to look clean and modern? What direction do we want to go?
So, one last question. You, whatever's happened has happened, and you're whizzing down the road in your car, and you're herring down the road, and you turn a corner, and the back seat flies open, and 4 of the games fly out, go down a ravine, into a river, and are swept away. Which game do you hope is still sitting on the back seat?
Oh, man, it's Glory to Rome. It has to be. It's my favourite game. I can't go past that.
So if people wanted to get hold of you, how would they do that?
On Twitter is probably the best place. I'm at Ian O'Toole Tweets. I have a website, which is ianotoole.com. That's a good place to get hold of me.
Fabulous. Well, Ian O'Toole, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter. You can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or you can make a one-time donation by hitting the PayPal button at 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And if I haven't had to bulk up to fend off the undercooked sprouts and the activated almonds, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.